But what can he do, David? What sort of impact can he make, and what would success look like for Frank Lampard?
Well, I was just admiring the headline "Back for Good" in a nod to take that on the Star's back page. There's some creative headlines going on tonight, and it's a really good story for us in the industry. What can he do? Well, he needs to win at Wolves to get them going again. They're at 11th place at the moment, and that's not going to be an easy task with Wolves scrapping away in their own right. But then, you could say they've not got a great deal to lose going to Madrid next week. Lampard has been part of some famous Chelsea victories over the years. And yeah, the point Jonathan makes about a lack of leaders is salient because, some of the performances you've seen from Chelsea pre all this recruitment and even post it is just not up to scratch and is far below what you'd expect even of such talented players. And then they're going to need to chip away. They've got plenty of winnable fixtures in this last 10 games or so. And so, yeah, if Lampard, has an outrageously good run, I suspect that will be a good headache for the ownership at Stamford Bridge, Todd Boehly and Badad Eghbali, who are ultimately making these decisions. And of course, the co-sporting directors, Lawrence Stewart and Paul Winstanley, will feed into them. And he may come into consideration if he causes a surprise and excels. But I do think their focus is on this being until the end of the season, and they'll continue to talk to their Nagelsmanns and Enriques and Pochettinos of this world, form a firm shortlist, undertake interviews, do due diligence, crunch the numbers, and they'll like to think they'll come to a good decision that will serve Chelsea well for the future. Because having made 2 changes of head coach in the last 10 months, if this doesn't go right, I think a lot more attention will turn on the hierarchy at Stamford Bridge, which is still relatively early in its ownership, and they won't want that. So yeah, these are very interesting times, and it's a massive summer ahead for them in so many different areas as well. Recruitment, and they've got plans to try and redevelop Stamford Bridge or move to a new stadium. They're trying to roll out a multi-club model. They've got financial fair play to comply with. So yeah, don't sleep on Chelsea.
Let's just look at the back page of the Star. Seems you referenced it there. So there is that headline, "Back for Good" and Deja Blue at Chelsea. And in fact, we mentioned the Telegraph before. They did a little graphics breakdown of which managers have actually improved second time around at certain clubs. And they named like Goose Hiddink and Steve Coppell and Harry Redknapp, and only 2 of 8 have actually got a better points per game record second time around than first. But on this, and in terms of the impact that could potentially be made by Frank Lampard, what about imbibing a bit of confidence into certain players, Jonathan, particularly someone like Mason Mount, who's had his issues with injury and his issues with form this season, and maybe you could help rejuvenate him a little bit?
Yeah, I'm sure he thinks he can do that. I think one of the points that he made was quite a direct reference to Graham Potter. Actually, he talked about the lack of goals in the team. He talked about him having these kind of attacking instincts as a player. He had a nose for goal, and that's what made him an effective attacking coach. And I assume these are kind of the same attacking instincts that caused Everton to score 15 goals in 20 games this season under him. I just want to make more like one other point about Lampard. There's a huge amount of talk in football about the diversity of the coaching pyramid, the diversity of coaches at the very top level, and the sort of thing that people are people in the game are demanding is that these jobs are given out on merit, that there are clear processes in place to get the most talented coaches to the very top of the game. And when you see something like this happening, and it's not kind of nothing personal against Frank Lampard, but has that job been given out on merit? Has there a proper process taken place? Is there a due process that has been followed? And I think a lot of aspiring managers will look at that decision and think there are a lot of problems still at the top end of the game in terms of diversity.
What do you think, David? What do you make of Jonathan's point there?
Well, I think Chelsea had a very difficult situation once they'd made the decision to get rid of Graham Potter. They installed immediately his assistant, Bruno Saltor, and the majority of Potter staff who remained behind. I think they would have been considering Lampard around that time, maybe even earlier when he was under pressure, Potter, around the time of the victories over Leeds and Borussia Dortmund. So at the same time you're playing matches, the chances of running a proper process is what is happening now. And so I agree with Jonathan. All clubs need to be embarking upon a much more diverse recruitment process. We talked many years ago now about the EFL, the Football League, adopting the sort of so-called Rooney rule in terms of making sure there was a BAME candidate at least on every interview process. But then, firstly, that doesn't apply to the Premier League. But secondly, it was only when there is an interview process. But if an owner just decides that there's a candidate they want to go for, there's no questions asked. And for me, that's not really good enough in these situations. But ultimately, the status quo is that these people own their clubs and they make their decisions. In the case of Lampard, yeah, Jonathan's not criticizing him specifically, and you can understand that they wanted to galvanize. I was at Stamford Bridge on Tuesday, and the atmosphere was so flat. It didn't seem that that Bruno Saltor wanted to be there, and certainly it didn't feel like the fans wanted him there. So Frank Lampard comes back and he's going to lift the place, but there is a much more fundamental and deeper issue that Jonathan refers to, and it just simply needs to be addressed by English football, and the evidence is not convincing in the slightest.
Jonathan, can they address this in the summer, Chelsea? And if so, what form does that take when they are appointing a longer-term basis replacement for Graham Potter? And who should be, therefore, candidates for the job?
Well, I mean, I think there is certainly a process in place for appointing the full-time manager, and that should, as always, be the best person for the job. I mean, the club have described it as an exhaustive process. The same names that I'm hearing, the same names that everyone else is hearing: Nagelsmann and Enrique and Pochettino. That process will be robust, and I think that's all you want. You want there to be a process that everyone can recognise, that everyone kind of understands what the criteria are, and that a job hasn't just been given out on a whim based on sentiment or friendship or pre-existing connections.